Hello everyone, welcome to the IAS Track channel. Welcome to the comprehensive budget 2026-27 analysis session. Now, today the budget was presented by the government, and budget is something which is important for every citizen of the country, be it a tea seller, be it an industrialist, be it the politician, and we ourselves, that is UPSC Civil Services aspirants. So this document becomes really very important, not just from the perspective of the prelims, but also very important from the perspective of the mains. So before I start the session, I want to make two things very clear. First is that we will try to cover the budget in a very comprehensive manner. We'll make sure that everything is covered from the UPSC Civil Service examination perspective. Not just the prelims aspect, but I'll also focus upon the mains aspect, right? Second thing which I would like to tell you is, what you can do is, in order to save your time, you can watch this particular video at 1.5x speed or 2x speed, right? Now, let's start. We have the budget. Now, budget is presented by the budget division, which basically comes under the Department of Economic Affairs in the Ministry of Finance. So that is something which is very important. You need to note it down. The Department of Economic Affairs. When we talk about the constitutional provisions, what you'll have to understand is that UPSC has been focusing upon the bare language of the Constitution. So it becomes very important that we base our discussion on the constitutional article itself. Starting with Article 112 subclause 1, which forms the very base with respect to the budget. One thing which you'll have to understand is that nowhere in the Constitution the word budget is mentioned. What the Constitution refers, especially in Article 112 subclause 1, is the annual financial statement. Article 112 subclause 1, what it says is that the President of India shall, in respect of every financial year, cause to be laid before both the houses of the Parliament the annual financial statement. Okay? And that is the reason what you must have seen today is that Finance Minister went to the President, right, and basically sought her permission with respect to the presentation of the budget. Then we have the next article, which is Article 112 subclause 2, which basically says that ki jo bhi estimates hain with respect to the expenditure, they shall show separately the expenditure which is charged and the expenditure what we call as other expenditure. तो जो आपके expenditures हैं वो आपको दो तरीके से दिखाने पड़ेंगे. You'll have to show in two ways. One is the charge expenditure and the other would be the other expenditure. Next thing what it says is कि जो भी आपका expenditure है, you'll have to differentiate or distinguish between the revenue expenditure and the other expenditures. तो ये दो चीज आपको इंपॉर्टेंट समझनी है. पहली चीज क्या कि जो भी expenditures होंगे you'll have to show as charge expenditures and other expenditures, and you'll have to separate the revenue expenditure from the other expenditures. Then we have Article 112 subclause 3. Article 112 subclause 3, what it talks about is a particular type of expenditure, as I told, which is charge expenditure. अब charge expenditure होता क्या है? What does it mean? See, there are certain expenditures which are not subject to the vote of the Parliament, right? They are primarily there so that the independence and the impartiality of the officers can be maintained. For example, when we talk about the emoluments or the allowances with respect to the President of India, the salaries and allowances of the chairman and deputy chairman of Rajya Sabha, the speaker and deputy speaker of Lok Sabha, the salaries and pensions of the Supreme Court judges, the pensions of the High Court judges. So ये क्या है? ये charge expenditure है. These are charge expenditures, and they are not subject to the vote of the Parliament. Next article which becomes important is Article 114. Now, Article 114 talks about the appropriation bills. What it clearly says is कि भाई no money shall be withdrawn from the consolidated fund of India except under the appropriation made by law. तो आपको अगर even if you have to take out 1 rupees from the consolidated fund of India, you need a law for that. You need a law for it. Simple as that. ठीक है? Next thing which we'll have to understand, there is also Article 113, which basically talks about two things. पहली बात ये, which I've already told you, कि जो charge expenditure है, that is not subject to the vote of the Parliament. Next, it talks about the demand for grants. हर ministry की अलग अलग demand होती है. Once that demand is voted, it becomes a grant. That is a votable part. तो भाई दो चीजें हो गई. First is the charge expenditure not subject to the vote. Second is the demand for grants which are subjected to the vote. That is what you'll have to understand. And the voting with respect to the demand for grants, it is the sole prerogative of Lok Sabha. ये आपको समझना पड़ेगा. It's the sole mandate of Lok Sabha. Article 114 I've already discussed. Next thing which you'll have to understand is we have different types of government accounts, and I'm deliberately discussing all these points because there is a lot of confusion surrounding the basic concepts. So let's clear the clutter and let's talk about these things. Let's talk about the very first account, which is the Consolidated Fund of India. देखिए, Consolidated Fund of India जो है, it draws its existence from Article 266. ठीक है, अब ये कंप्राइज क्या करता है? What it comprises of? It basically comprises of all the revenues received by the Government of India, then loans raised by the Government of India, या अगर गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया कोई रिकवरी कर रहा है लोन्स की, राइट, सो ऑल दैट अमाउंट गोज इनटू द कंसोलिडेटेड फंड ऑफ इंडिया. नेक्स्ट थिंग व्हिच आई हैव टू अंडरस्टैंड इज नो अमाउंट कैन बी ड्रॉन फ्रॉम द कंसोलिडेटेड फंड ऑफ इंडिया विदाउट द ऑथराइजेशन ऑफ द पार्लियामेंट. ये बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट चीज है. Without the authorization of the parliament, you cannot take out even a single penny. Next, we have the contingency fund. ये कौन से आर्टिकल में मेंशन है? This is mentioned in Article 267. As the word says, contingency, मतलब कोई भी unforeseen situation आ गई, ठीक है, कोई disaster हो गया, तो Article 267 ये authorize करता है. It authorizes the existence of the contingency fund of India. और ये किसके disposal पे placed है? This is placed at the disposal of the President of India. One thing is very important. This fund is operated by the Secretary in the Finance Ministry. To be specific, the Secretary, Department of Economic Affairs. Do remember that कि भाई कंटिजेंसी फंड जो है इट इज बेसिकली ऑपरेटेड बाय द सेक्रेटरी डिपार्टमेंट ऑफ इकोनॉमिक अफेयर्स. अब बहुत सिंपल सी बात है कि भाई आपने कुछ अमाउंट निकाला, यू टुक आउट सम अमाउंट फ्रॉम द कंटिजेंसी फंड ऑफ इंडिया, नाउ दैट हैज टू बी कंपनसेटेड. तो जो पार्लियामेंट्री अप्रूवल होता है वो एक्स पोस्ट फैक्टो होता है. आपने आज कोई अनफोर्सीन सिचुएशन आ गई, यू टुक आउट सम मनी, नाउ यू विल हैव टू बेसिकली डू द कंपनसेशन. दैट वुड बी एक्स पोस्ट फैक्टो आफ्टर ऑलरेडी द एक्सपेंसेस हैव बीन डन फ्रॉम द कंटिजेंसी फंड ऑफ इंडिया. And that amount which has been spent from the contingency fund, that would be compensated from the consolidated fund of India. That is what you'll have to understand. Total corpus कितना है इस fund का? It is 30,000 crores. Remember that. Next we have the public account, which basically Article 266 subclause 2 talks about. देखिए आर्टिकल मैंने आपको बता दिया. Now इस फंड में, इस अकाउंट में जो भी फंड्स हैं, they do not belong to the government. What does it mean that they do not belong to the government? कि भाई जो भी इस अकाउंट में फंड्स हैं, they, for example, they constitute the provident fund, or they can be the savings deposit, small saving deposit, या कोई अगर एक specific fund government ने बनाया with respect to the road development, education, तो that is something which you'll have to understand. It is basically the savings of the people which comprises the public account. Government does not have ownership over it, and you don't need the parliamentary approval for taking out money from the public account. That is what you'll have to understand. अब बात करते हैं हम बजट की, ठीक है. What the budget basically comprises of? The union budget, it basically can be structured into part pertaining to the revenue and into part pertaining to the capital. तो जो रेवेन्यू वाला पार्ट है हम उसको बोलते हैं रेवेन्यू बजट, जो कैपिटल वाला पार्ट है उसको हम बोलते हैं कैपिटल बजट. नाउ वंस आई टॉक अबाउट द रेवेन्यू बजट, इट कंप्राइजेस ऑफ टू थिंग्स. फर्स्ट इज द रेवेन्यू रिसिप्ट्स एंड द सेकंड थिंग इज द रेवेन्यू एक्सपेंडिचर. रेवेन्यू रिसिप्ट्स क्या होंगे? देखिए ये दो तरह से हो सकता है. फर्स्ट इट कैन बी द टैक्स रेवेन्यूज, टैक्स रिसिप्ट्स, ठीक है, मतलब भाई जो भी प्रोसीड्स हैं टैक्सेस के सरकार को जो मिल रहे हैं, या फिर कोई भी ड्यूटी लेवी की सरकार ने उसका जो प्रोसीड्स आए. देन वी हैव द नॉन टैक्स रिसिप्ट्स. फॉर एग्जाम्पल कि भाई इंटरेस्ट और डिविडेंड पेमेंट्स जो सरकार को मिल रहे हैं ऑन द बेसिस ऑफ इन्वेस्टमेंट्स, या फिर कोई भी फीस सरकार लागू कर रही है फॉर एनी सर्विस इट इज गिविंग, इट इज प्रोवाइडिंग. सो दैट इज द नॉन टैक्स रेवेन्यू. देन वी हैव द नेक्स्ट थिंग विच इज द रेवेन्यू एक्सपेंडिचर. रेवेन्यू एक्सपेंडिचर प्राइमली जो होता है, इट बेसिकली रिलेट्स टू द नॉर्मल रनिंग ऑफ द गवर्नमेंट डिपार्टमेंट. फॉर एग्जाम्पल सैलरीज हो गए, ठीक है, जो इंटरेस्ट पेमेंट्स गवर्नमेंट को देने हैं, जो सब्सिडीज सरकार का खर्चा उठा रही है फॉर दैट पर्टिकुलर थिंग, you know, it comes through the revenue expenditure, and the grants given to the states and the UTs, right? So the grants which are given to the states and UTs, union territories, they are a part of this revenue expenditure. So what you'll have to understand is कि ये जो revenue expenditure है, this is not leading to the creation of any capital asset, any asset. That is what you'll have to understand. एक recurring form of expenses है जो कि सरकार करती है through revenue expenditures, not leading to the creation of any asset. Then we have the capital budget. Capital budget, what you'll have to understand is it comprises of two things: capital receipts and capital payments. Capital receipts का मतलब क्या है कि भाई जो भी loans which are raised by the government of India, ठीक है, जिनको हम बोलते हैं market loans, या फिर सरकार जो borrowing कर रही है, the borrowings by the government in the form of, you must have heard about the treasury bills, or the loans received from the foreign governments. Let's say कि भाई India has taken a loan from Japanese government, or the loans, the recoveries of the loans which are given to the states and the UTs. It comes as a part of the capital receipts. Next we have the capital payments. Capital payments का मतलब क्या है कि जो भी capital expenditure आप कर रहे हो on the acquisition of the estates, आप कोई भी एक्विजिशन कर रहे हो एसेट्स का, फॉर एग्जांपल लैंड, बिल्डिंग, एज आई सेड द एसेट्स, या फिर मशीनरी, इक्विपमेंट्स, या फिर लोन्स विच आर ग्रांटेड बाय द गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया टू डिफरेंट स्टेट्स एंड यूटीज, दैट इज व्हाट, और डिफरेंट गवर्नमेंट कंपनीज, दैट इज व्हाट कंप्राइजेज ऑफ द कैपिटल पेमेंट्स. ये बेसिक एक फ्रेमवर्क है बजट का जो आपको पता होना चाहिए. There are some things, for example, the fiscal deficit, the effective revenue deficit, the revenue deficit, primary deficit. We'll have a discussion at the end, right? And please do watch the video till the end, because this is going to be very, very important, especially from the perspective of the civil service examination. All these things, the fiscal deficit, the revenue deficit, effective revenue deficit, primary deficit, I'll have a discussion at the end. Now coming to the main theme of the budget. देखिए, one thing which I'll have to understand is there are no big announcement as such in this year's budget, and it is following a kind of a continuity. ठीक है, एक continuity maintained है, because already according to the government we have made significant progress in different areas. We should better consolidate. तो हमारा focus जो है वो consolidation पे है. We are focusing upon the consolidation part. That is what you'll have to understand. What the finance minister basically talked about is कि जो हमारी पहली तो थीम आप डिस्कस कर लेते हैं. थीम है विकसित भारत अमिड ग्लोबल अनसर्टेनिटी. विकसित भारत अमिड ग्लोबल अनसर्टेनिटी. नाउ what you'll have to understand is why we have focused, or why the finance minister, or why the government has focused upon the global uncertainty is for the reason that we have a lot of things taking place in the world. There is the weakening of the multilateralism, especially the institutions of multilateralism. There are countries, there are unilateral actions which are taken by the countries in the form of the US. ठीक है, tariff imposition हो रहा है. There are supply chain disruptions which we are witnessing, and this has an effect on the strategic sectors as well. For example, China has a lot of reserves of the rare earth, and they form the very backbone of the critical emerging technologies, and because of it can place any restrictions, which it has done in the case of US. So this is something which is leading to the supply chain disruptions. Then there is technological disruptions. What we are witnessing is rapid technological transformation. You talk about the artificial intelligence, you talk about the let's say automation, the cloud computing, the quantum computing. There has been, especially in the last 5 to 6 years, there has been a disruption in the technology all over the world. So combining all these factors, or you can also talk about the geopolitical factors. For example, what we are witnessing right now is the situation in the West Asia, primarily in the context of Iran, right? There are possibilities of a regional conflict, plus what we have seen with respect to Russia, Ukraine, or let's talk about Israel and Palestine issue, right? Or let's talk about the antagonism which exists between Israel and the other Muslim monarchies, or between Israel or Iran. So there is a very, tough situation. The geopolitics is in chaos right now. So amid that particular situation, the finance minister, the government has come up with this particular budget. Now what you'll have to understand is that when we talk about India, we are a high growth economy. We are among the very few countries who are witnessing that level of economic growth. Okay. Next is what you'll have to understand is that why this has been made possible is for the reason which the government says that we have focused upon the fiscal discipline. We have made sure कि हमारे खर्चे ज़्यादा ना हो. We have made sure that if we are borrowing within limits. We have seen periods of low inflation, right? That according to the government, what it says is that we have protected especially the vulnerable sections, including the poor. And there has been a strong focus on public investments. Public investments both on the hard infrastructure, you talk about the power lines, you talk about the railways, you talk about the highways, bridges and everything, or you talk about the social infrastructure, you talk about the education, or let's talk about the elderly population, the vulnerable sections. So we have focused upon the public investments, and because of that, we have maintained a robust and a strong structure. For the government, the focus is on the stability and long-term growth. We are not looking for a short-term growth. Rather, we are looking for a long-term growth which is sustainable in nature. That is what you'll have to understand. Next thing which the government has talked about is that we have gone for a lot of reforms in the last decade. Reforms in the forms of कि भाई कुछ structural reforms हम लोगों ने लिए in the form of GST, in the form of the insolvency code, या फिर recently we had the labor codes, right? So that is what you'll have to understand. Next thing which you'll have to see is that the government has been fiscally prudent. The government has made sure कि भाई वो अपना fiscal deficit कम करे और reaches or it makes it to a sustainable level. Then public expenditure has been increasing at a rapid pace. We have been focusing upon the national infrastructure pipeline. We have been focusing upon the Gati initiative. We have been focusing upon making sure that there is investments in almost each and every domain. Next thing, especially after the COVID, we have focused upon the Atmanirbharta. We have focused upon the self-reliance. That is very important. Atmanirbharta. And this especially in the sectors when we talk about the important sectors of electronic manufacturing, or let's say the renewable energy technologies, or let's say the battery storage systems, we are focusing upon these areas. We are focusing upon the API, active pharmaceutical ingredients. So ये सारे factors हैं जिनकी वजह से we have seen a robust economic framework. And this year we have not seen any one-time big announcements. Last year there were there were some shocks, or there were some big announcements with respect to the overall tax structure, the income tax, but this year we haven't seen that thing. And again, the vision is Viksit Bharat at 2047, which is the very objective of the government, to make sure that we become developed by the year 2047, right, which would mark 100 years of independence. That is a basic framework. Next thing what the government has talked about is एक Kartavya framework. Kartavya means that you have a duty towards the people, right? And it is something which relates to different sectors. The government has basically classified its Kartavya framework into 3 domains. The very first Kartavya one, it relates to the acceleration of economic growth and to sustain that. ठीक है? Focus क्या रहेगा? Focus रहेगा भाई productivity पे. To make sure that we have productivity in the overall system, to make sure that we have competitiveness, to make sure that we every industry in India from different sectors, we are competitive, not just internally but rather also externally, and we should also be resilience to global shocks, okay? Be it the supply chain disruptions or any other disruption, geopolitical conflict. So we'll have to be resilient. 3 चीज हैं, productivity, competitiveness and resilience. कौन से instruments हैं भाई यहाँ पर? We have the manufacturing, we have the infrastructure, we have the energy security, we have the financial sector reforms, we have the city-led growth, and we'll have a discussion in great detail. Next Kartavya talks about कि भाई we'll have to fulfill the aspirations and build capacity. किसकी aspirations? Aspirations of whom? So we have the aspirations with respect to primarily in terms of the youths, right? When we are talking about youth, we need to provide them productive livelihood opportunities. उसके लिए आपको focus करना पड़ेगा किस पे? Skills पे. उसके लिए आपको focus करना पड़ेगा to make your services sector more robust. You should focus upon education to employment linkage, because हम लोग क्या देखते हैं कि भाई there is a mismatch between the kind of education which people are having, the kind of skills they have, and the skills required by the industry, right? And we would also focus upon the new professions which would be for the future India, and we'll talk about that, what all new domains we need to focus upon. Next thing is the Kartavya 3, which is Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas. Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, primarily in terms of the inclusion, to make sure that we make an inclusive society. तो focus कहाँ रहेगा? We'll focus upon the farmers, we'll focus upon the Divyangjans, we'll focus upon the other vulnerable sections including women, we'll focus upon different sectors in the form of the mental health, and we'll also make sure that we focus upon the balanced regional development. ठीक है? जिसके लिए the government has been, in this particular budget, it has focused a lot on the northeast. right, and the eastern part of the country, and we'll have a discussion regarding that, Purvodaya and Northeast. So this is what the Kartavya framework of the government is. In line with this, the government has basically proceeded with the reforms and the steps it would take in different sectors. अब बात करते हैं, we have the next thing, which is the manufacturing push. How to basically capitalize or how to basically convert these kartavyas into reality. The very first thing which you'll have to understand is that why we are focusing upon manufacturing. ठीक है भाई, manufacturing क्यों? Because many of the commentators, what they have said is that we have directly gone from the agriculture to the services-led growth. We have in a way missed this particular trajectory of manufacturing, and especially because of it, what we are witnessing is a jobless growth. ठीक है, तो we'll have to focus adequately on the manufacturing part. There is no other alternative, because manufacturing is going to provide the jobs, that to productive jobs. It would lead to the export competitiveness. जो भी product हम बाहर export कर रहे हैं, it would be competitive. We would make sure that it is competitive, not just internally but also externally, and we'll also focus upon the supply chain resilience. India has to become an important player in the overall supply chains, be it with respect to the critical technologies, be it with respect to the raw materials. We'll have to become a part of the supply chains, and for that we have to focus upon the manufacturing, and we'll have to also focus upon the import substitution. ये बहुत ज़रूरी है. जो चीज़ हम खुद से मैन्युफैक्चर कर सकते हैं, द थिंग्स और द इक्विपमेंट्स और द कमोडिटीज़ विच वी कैन मैन्युफैक्चर ऑन आवर ओन, वाई वी हैव द नीड टू बेसिकली इम्पोर्ट दैट. Rather, we should produce it or manufacture it on our own. So therefore, this makes manufacturing very, very important. What have been the different things which the budget is talking about? The budget has talked about a very important initiative which is going to launch, which is Biopharma Shakti, right? Total outlay of this program would be 10,000 crores for a period of 5 years, and this would focus on two things: biologics and biosimilars. Biologics and biosimilars. ठीक है, पहली बात, बायोलॉजिक्स होता क्या है? देखिए, वो मेडिसिन्स, दोज मेडिसिन्स विच आर डिराइव्ड फ्रॉम द लिविंग सेल्स टू ट्रीट डिफरेंट डिसीजेस, फॉर एग्जाम्पल कैंसर, या फिर बहुत सारे डिसीज होते हैं इन द फॉर्म ऑफ ऑटो इम्यून डिसऑर्डर्स, उनको हम बोलते हैं भाई बायोलॉजिक्स. इट कैन बी बेसिकली इन द फॉर्म ऑफ द वैक्सीन्स और समथिंग. देन वी हैव, और या एंटीबॉडीज हो गया. देन वी हैव द बायोसिमिलर्स. देखिए, बायोसिमिलर्स जो हैं, दे आर सिमिलर टू बायोलॉजिक्स, ठीक है, एंड but they are not identical. They are similar to biologics, but they are not identical to them. And these are what you can say is the close alternatives. These are the close alternatives of biologics. And biologics are the original. They are the original products which are derived from the living organisms. So therefore, government is now in the process of focusing upon the biologics and biosimilars, and the primarily what the reason government has given is that we are witnessing a rise in the non-communicable diseases, and therefore we need adequate investments in this particular domain so as to make India a global hub for biologics and biosimilars. ठीक है, significance क्या होगा कि भाई we'll be able to focus upon the health security, we'll be able to focus upon making sure that we have high value manufacturing in the country, and we'll also be able to export. If we basically give adequate emphasis to these biologics and biosimilars, we'll be able to export also these commodities. Next thing is the semiconductors. Very, very important component of the emerging technologies. Almost each and every electronic equipment which we use comprises of the semiconductors. We already started with the semiconductor mission before. Now we are focusing upon the semiconductor mission, India Semiconductor Mission 2.0. इंपॉर्टेंस क्या है इसकी? दैट वी आर मेकिंग श्योर कि हम यहाँ पर सिर्फ असेंबली, चिप असेंबली पे फोकस ना करें. अभी हम लोग क्या करते हैं, चिप मंगाते हैं बाहर से, वी बेसिकली इंपोर्ट द चिप्स एंड वी फोकस अपॉन द असेंबली. वी वांट टू डेवलप a full stack ecosystem with respect to the semiconductors, जहाँ पर the focus would be on semiconductors design, semiconductors manufacturing. We'll make sure that we have adequate intellectual property development in the semiconductors. We'll focus upon the research and development. So we'll focus on these things. We'll focus upon coming with skilling centers. Important क्यों है? Because देखिए, this is something which we call as the part of emerging technologies, and this is going to be the future. If we are critically dependent on other countries for the import of these substances, primarily the semiconductors, then this would affect our strategic autonomy. तो ये हमारी इफेक्ट होगी, एंड वी कैनॉट अलाउ दैट. विल have to focus upon this particular sector in order to give a push to different other sectors. For example, electronics हो गया, defense platforms हो गए, electric vehicle हो गया, artificial intelligence का hardware हो गया, data centers हो गया. So this becomes very, very important. Next thing the government is focusing upon coming up with the electronics components manufacturing scheme. पहले की स्कीम है, नई स्कीम नहीं है, बट हाँ, गवर्नमेंट इज नाउ फोकसिंग अपॉन मेकिंग श्योर दैट वी इंक्रीज द overall outlay. So the scheme is Electronic Component Manufacturing Scheme, ECMS. Previous outlay was something around 23,000 crores. Now we are going to increase it to 40,000 crores. Again, simple सा objective है कि भाई जो भी हमारे investment commitments हैं वो भाई almost double कर दिए जाएं, और हम value addition करें, हम domestic value addition करें primarily in the electronics domain, because still we are critically dependent on China when we talk about the electronics import, right? Next thing is rare earth magnets corridor. Very, very important. We have, for example, rare earth elements. वहाँ पर there is a particular subsection which is the rare earth magnets. Why this is important? This forms the very backbone of the electric vehicles. ठीक है, एक rare earth magnet होती है which is neodymium iron boron, NdFeB, which we import from China. Almost 93% of it is imported from China, and this forms a very backbone of the battery systems in the electric vehicles, right? So this becomes very, very important. The government is saying that we will cover few states and we'll come up with the rare earth permanent magnets and corridors, different corridors. For example, Odisha, Kerala, Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu. ठीक है, why rare earths matter? As I already said, that it forms the critical component of electric vehicles, wind turbines, defense electronics, अलग-अलग platforms हो गए, या strategic mineral security. So this becomes again very, very important. Next thing which government talks about is chemical parks and capital goods. Chemical parks in the form of developing a cluster-based plug-and-play model. Plug-and-play model में क्या होता है? That you have all the facilities which are provided by the government at the very start. So you need not to basically set up all the facilities. All those facilities are itself provided by the government before you start the working at that particular place. Plug and play model. Again, objective क्या है? To reduce the chemical import dependency, the kind of dependency we are having right now. So this is again very, very important. We have to focus upon the capital goods. Capital goods का मतलब क्या है कि भाई we have, देखो अलग अलग we have the machines, requirement of machines for producing high end equipments or instruments. So we need those capitals, and we will focus upon making sure कि भाई हमारा पूरा system digitally enabled हो जाए. उसके लिए we'll have to, the government would make sure that focus upon increasing the production of these capital goods. And the government is also focusing upon a new scheme which is the construction and infrastructure equipment scheme. Construction and infrastructure equipment scheme, where it would focus upon making sure that we cover the lifts, we cover the tunnel boring machines. You must have seen that the machines which are used for the creation of those tunnels for the metro, and different equipments, be it the high altitude road equipments. Objective simple सा है that we have to make sure that we do not import these things from other countries, specifically China. We can manufacture these capital goods and these equipments on our own, and then we can make sure that we do the development as per our own needs. Next, we have the container manufacturing. So we have focused upon a particular scheme which is container manufacturing. Very important. Containers are very important as far as the overall export import is concerned, EXIM is concerned. तो यहाँ पर हमको containers चाहिए उन export या imports के लिए. तो we'll be focusing right now. What we are having is we are dependent upon the imports of the containers from different countries. So we would focus upon having an indigenous base with respect to the container manufacturing, and the government would focus on making sure that it invests almost 10,000 crores for the next 5 years. और जो हमारी डिपेंडेंस है लॉजिस्टिक्स की बाकी कंट्रीज पे, द डिपेंडेंस वी हैव ऑन द अदर कंट्रीज विद रिस्पेक्ट टू द लॉजिस्टिक्स, वी रिड्यूस इट. दैट इज द ओवरऑल मैन्युफैक्चरिंग पुश. आई होप इट इज क्लियर. Let's then go to the textile sector. Very, very important component, one of the primary source of employment after the agriculture sector. Very, very important. तो यहाँ पर सरकार ने, the government has focused upon different programs, different textile programs. For example, the National Fiber Scheme. Over here, the government would focus on different types of fibers. For example, भाई natural fiber हो गया, या फिर man-made हो गया, man-made fibers, ठीक है, polyester for example, or the new age fibers. New age fibers. we have the geotextiles and all that. So we would be focusing upon all these kinds of fibers. Then we would focus upon textile expansion and employment scheme, where we would make sure कि जो भी हमारे traditional clusters हैं, we have Ludhiana, we have Banaras, we have different centers of the production of textiles. We basically modernize them. We make sure कि भाई technological integration हो, ताकि ओवरऑल प्रोडक्टिविटी इंक्रीज हो, ताकि ओवरऑल कॉम्पिटिटिवनेस इंक्रीज हो उन ट्रेडिशनल क्लस्टर्स की. देन वी वुड ऑल्सो मेक श्योर दैट वी फोकस अपॉन द एम्प्लॉयमेंट एस्पेक्ट, दैट मोर एंड मोर setups are basically installed with respect to the textiles, and more people get the employment opportunity, productive employment opportunity. Then the government is also thinking to come up with the Samarth 2.0, which primarily deals with the skilling aspect कि भाई जो भी इंडस्ट्री की डिमांड है, in order to make sure that we match the demands of the industry, we would focus upon the skilling and reskilling also. Not just the skilling, but rather reskilling also. Next, we have the mega textile parks. So again, the government is focusing upon making sure that we come up with more and more numbers of textile parks. और यहाँ पर जो focus है, यहाँ पर focus है हमारा on the conventional textiles, plus we will have to focus upon the technical textiles. ठीक है, तो भाई आपने देखा होगा that we have the geo nets, we have different nets which are used in the construction में use होता है, या फिर in the medical domain, in the hospitals we use different kinds of textiles. So these are technical textiles which have a specific purpose and a specific domain. So we'll have to focus upon these technical textiles. We'll have to make sure कि ये जो भी हमारे textile parks हैं, they compete among each other, and then the government would definitely provide the incentive also. ठीक है. Next thing which the government is focusing upon, the handloom and the handicrafts integration. The government is thinking to come up with a new initiative which is Mahatma Gandhi Gram Swaraj initiative. ठीक है, यहाँ पर as Gandhi always wanted to basically focus upon the cottage industries, we would focus upon the khadi, we would focus upon the handlooms, handicrafts, and we'll make sure कि जो भी produce हमारा है इन खादी, हैंडलूम और हैंडीक्राफ्ट से, इट गेट्स द ग्लोबल रिकॉग्निशन. तो यहाँ पर हमारी फोकस ब्रांडिंग पे भी होगा. ठीक है, जो भी हमारी चीज़ें बाहर जा रही हैं, be it Europe or US, we get a good price of it. And how is that possible? If we go with the tags, the proper branding. For you must have heard about the geographical tags, right? And we'd also focus upon the market access. We'll make sure that we have market access in different corners. And this is very good because recently we have signed the free trade agreement with Europe, with the European Union, right? India, EU free trade agreement. And we are going to benefit a lot, especially when we talk about the textiles. Because अभी तक क्या था कि countries like Bangladesh or Pakistan, they were basically they were being imposed 0% duty, but our produce was being imposed a lot of taxes. But because of this FTA, we would also be subjected to 0% duty. So we are expecting a lot of increase in the overall textile exports to Europe, right? Especially because of the FTA. Next thing is that the government is focusing upon new manufacturing niche areas. कौन से वो areas है? For example, कि भाई sports good. We already know that Indians, especially the women cricket team or the others, they are performing very good as far as the sports is concerned. Also, this is an area which is very important for the development of the youths. So we are focusing upon the sports good manufacturing, where we would focus upon the research and development. किस चीज़ में? Material sciences में. ताकि we come up with better quality sports products, equipment design. और होगा क्या इस चीज़ से? देखो, पहली बात तो that we would be able to, this is sports is an area which is there in every country around the world. So we'll be able to export to different countries the sports goods, and also this would give a lot of employment opportunities. ठीक है. Next area which the government is focusing upon is जो भी legacy industrial clusters हैं, पुराने clusters हैं, उनका rejuvenation करना. ठीक है. तो यहाँ पर the government has a list of almost 200 legacy industrial clusters, and we would focus upon the upgradation of these industrial clusters in the form of the infrastructure upgradation या technological infusion करो, cost competitiveness बढ़ाओ उन चीज़ों की. तो यहाँ पर आपको एक चीज़ देखनी पड़ेगी that we are not just focusing upon the greenfield sectors. Through this, we are also focusing upon the brownfield development. जो पहले से exist करते हैं वो सारे areas, the government is focusing upon those areas. I hope it is clear. Let's go to the next part. Now, once we talk about the next sector, which is again the MSMEs MSMEs are the lifeblood of the Indian economy. You talk about the overall manufacturing, their contribution in the overall value addition, their contribution in the exports, it is too much. And this is something which plays a very very important role, especially once we talk about the employment generation. ठीक है, जो भी वैल्यू चेन्स हैं अलग अलग, तो मैन्युफैक्चरिंग वैल्यू चेन्स में MSME contribute a lot, especially once we talk about the domestic consumption and also the exports. The government has made it clear that we would focus on the MSMEs, micro, small, and medium enterprises, because they are the backbone of the overall economy, be it the employment generation, the value chains, the export, and everything. ठीक है. Now, issues क्या हैं? MSMEs के issues की जब बात की जाती है, and that is why I said that this content is very important from the mains perspective. Once we talk about the capital excess, ठीक है, adequate capital नहीं है, working capital नहीं है, technological obsolescence है, there is lack of technology in various MSMEs, and they don't have the adequate capital for the upgradation. Next thing is कि भाई formalized नहीं है, उससे होता क्या है, that the workers do not have the access to the social security benefits, right? So there are a lot of issues. Liquidity concerns hai, adequate working capital nahi hai, compliance burden hai, because they are subjected to, if they would formalize, they would be subjected to a lot of compliance. और अगर कंप्लाइंस करोगे तो भाई ऑब्वियसली बात है, you require more of the funding. So what you'll have to understand is many of these owners of the MSMEs, they themselves don't want to get formalized, right? But the government is focusing upon making sure that there is conducive environment for the MSMEs, because they should not be just surviving. Rather, they should be the champions. Right? And therefore, the government is focusing upon different areas. The government is thinking to come up with the SME growth fund. 10,000 crores SME growth fund. The corpus is of 10,000 crores. And again, the very objective is कि आप identify करो, and जो भी हाई पोटेंशियल MSMEs है कंट्री में, उनको आइडेंटिफाई करके उनको स्केल अप करो इन अ सेंस यू प्रोवाइड देम द अपॉर्चुनिटीज टू बेसिकली ग्रो एंड देन बेसिकली प्रॉस्पर इन द मार्केट. नेक्स्ट थिंग इज दैट दे आर फोकसिंग अपॉन क्रिएटिंग द नेशनल चैंपियंस. ठीक है, और आप अगर अच्छा परफॉर्म करोगे, यू वुड हैव द इंसेंटिव्स, यू वुड बी गिवन द इंसेंटिव्स अकॉर्डिंग टू द वे यू परफॉर्म, and there are certain performance criteria which the government is talking about, and then there would be the MSME champions. The next thing is that we already have a particular fund which is Self-Reliant India Fund. ठीक है, यहाँ पर government is talking about doing the top up, adding 2,000 crores in this particular Self-Reliant India Fund. Objective क्या है? Focus area यहाँ पर किसका होगा? माइक्रो एंटरप्राइजेस पे. ठीक है, और जिन एंटरप्राइजेस को अर्ली स्टेज में, every startup wants some fund at the very early stage, तो उनको risk capital provide करना. ठीक है, because it's a risky business. Every business has some form of the risks, especially once we talk about the MSMEs. The people who are starting businesses, they don't have adequate capital with them, so they need to be provided with the risk capital. ठीक है, और ये 2021 में आया था Self-Reliant India Fund, but we are now focusing upon the top up of this particular fund. I hope things are clear with respect to the MSMEs. Now talking about the liquidity aspect, how to make sure that we have adequate liquidity with respect to the MSMEs. उनके पास adequate funds हैं या नहीं, वो बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है. तो भाई एक ट्रेड रिसीवेबल ई डिस्काउंटिंग सिस्टम है रिजर्व बैंक ऑफ इंडिया का. तो यहाँ पर क्या है कि भाई लेट्स से कि एक पर्टिकुलर MSME है A, and it has provided some goods to a particular company, right? A particular company. Now this company says that I would give you the payment for this after a period of 15 days. अब आप सपोज करो that this particular MSME is in the need of funds. So what it can do is it can basically this company would give a slip to it, a receipt of it, कि भाई मुझे I am basically bound to give you this much amount of payment after 15 days. Now this slip can be given to some of the financial institutions which are a part of the trades platform, और वहाँ पर by giving this receipt you can get, or let's say this particular firm A would get an amount almost equivalent to that which this company was about to give to A. तो यहाँ पर क्या है कि जो वर्किंग कैपिटल रिक्वायरमेंट है, वर्किंग कैपिटल डे टू डे रिक्वायरमेंट्स जो है इस पर्टिकुलर MSME का, वो फुलफिल हो जाएगा. नाउ व्हाट द गवर्नमेंट इज सेइंग इज दैट वी वुड फोकस अपॉन द मैंडेटरी ट्रेड्स फॉर दी सेंट्रल पब्लिक सेक्टर एंटरप्राइजेस, ठीक है। तो जो भी परचेसेस होंगी, जो भी सेंट्रल पब्लिक सेक्टर एंटरप्राइजेस जो भी परचेस करेंगे डिफरेंट एमएसएमईज पे, दे हैव टू बी सेटल्ड वाया द ट्रेड्स प्लेटफॉर्म। अब इससे होगा क्या, जब सेंट्रल पब्लिक सेक्टर एंटरप्राइजेस ये चीज़ करेंगे, दिस वुड ऑल्सो मेक श्योर दैट different private players who are getting the products from the MSMEs, they also go to this trades platform. क्यों? सिंपल सी बात है, ताकि adequate liquidity हो MSMEs के पास, right? Next thing is that there is also the provision for the credit guarantee via the credit guarantee trust fund for the micro, small and medium enterprises. Credit guarantee का मतलब क्या होता है? पहली बात ये कि भाई we have, let's say, the MSMEs, right? MSMEs, let's say the government comes with a scheme कि भाई MSMEs different banks से या फिर financial institution से, they would be able to secure a loan collateral free. उनको कोई कोलेटरल देने की जरूरत नहीं है। तो जाहिर सी बात है भाई, दिस कैन बी सब्जेक्ट टू अ फेलियर, दिस एमएसएमई कैन बी सब्जेक्ट टू अ फेलियर। तो यहाँ पर यू नीड टू प्रोवाइड अ कवर, यू नीड टू प्रोवाइड अ बैकिंग टू दीज बैंक्स, ठीक है। तो उस गारंटी को प्रोवाइड किया जाता है इस पर्टिकुलर स्कीम से, ठीक है। क्रेडिट गारंटी ट्रस्ट फॉर द माइक्रो, स्मॉल एंड मीडियम एंटरप्राइजेस। अब सरकार क्या बोल रही है कि ये जो इनवॉइस डिस्काउंटिंग है, इसके लिए भी वी वुड प्रोवाइड द कवर। So again, it is trying to focus on this particular area to make sure कि in MSMEs के पास, these MSMEs must not be devoid of the working capital. They must have adequate funding with them, and this would also reduce, ये क्या करेगा ultimately, जो lenders हैं उनका जो रिस्क है वो कम हो जाएगा, ठीक है, because government would provide the credit guarantee. Next, government is focusing upon the government e-marketplace and TReDS integration. सिंपल सी बात है कि जो भी सरकार प्रोक्योर कर रही है, प्रोक्योरमेंट कर रही है थ्रू दी गवर्नमेंट ई मार्केट प्लेस, उसका जो डेटा है वो फाइनेंशियर्स के पास चला जाए। उससे क्या होगा कि भाई देयर वुड बी अ काइंड ऑफ अ ट्रांसपेरेंसी which would exist in the system, and this would enable faster and cheaper credit for the MSMEs in different sectors. Then we have the next thing, which is the trades receivable as tradable assets, कि भाई जो भी ट्रेड्स रिसीवेबल्स हैं आपके, आप उनको ट्रेडेबल एसेट्स की तरह यूज़ करो। तो मतलब क्या है, यहाँ पर देयर वुड बी अ क्रिएशन ऑफ अ सेकेंडरी मार्केट। जब सेकेंडरी मार्केट क्रिएट होगा तो यहाँ पर देयर वुड बी मोर लिक्विडिटी इन द मार्केट, देयर वुड बी मोर पीपल बाइंग दीज रिसीवेबल्स, राइट, एंड इट वुड ऑल्सो लीड टू दी faster settlements of these assets. So again, the very objective through the trades for the CPSEs or the credit guarantee fund or the GEM integration, everything is to make sure that these MSMEs have adequate liquidity with them, adequate working capital with them. I hope it is clear. Next, let's go to the next part, which is the infrastructure. बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है, एंड सॉरी देर आर टू थिंग्स विच इज लेफ्ट. द वेरी फर्स्ट नेक्स्ट इज द फास्टर पेमेंट्स एंड चीपर क्रेडिट. अगेन द वेरी ऑब्जेक्टिव एज आई सेड कि भाई सेम सिंपल सी बात है दैट वी हैव टू प्रोवाइड मोर एंड मोर that kind of environment where these MSMEs have adequate liquidity with them and they access the credit at a cheaper rate. They should not access the credit at a high rate. Next thing, there is one thing which is quite important and quite new and innovative. The budget talks about the corporate mitras. It talks about that we have different bodies. देखो for example by Institute for Chartered Accountants हो गया, या फिर we have ICMAI, we have different institutes. We want to basically make sure that we have these professionals, especially in tier 2 and tier 3 cities. तो अब होगा क्या, ये जो भी बॉडीज़ हैं, जो भी प्रोफेशनल बॉडीज़ हैं, दे शुड कम आउट विद द मॉडुलर कोर्सेज, स्मॉल कोर्सेज, पैरा प्रोफेशनल, नॉट एग्जैक्टली fully professional courses, but para professional courses, so that we can have adequate number of these professionals, especially in tier 2 and tier 3 cities. इससे क्या होगा, फॉर एग्जाम्पल लेट्स से कि भाई आपने एक कोर्स निकाला वेयर यू आर फोकसिंग अपॉन द एक्विजिशन ऑफ टैलेंट विद रिस्पेक्ट टू लेट्स टॉक अबाउट द अकाउंट मैनेजमेंट, ठीक है, अकाउंट्स को कैसे रखना है. तो अलग अलग MSMEs होती हैं, if they have to comply with the government directive, they need these accountants, they need these professionals. So यहाँ पर objective है एक cadre create करना, एक strong cadre create करना with respect to these professionals, especially in the tier 2 and tier 3 towns, so that these MSMEs, they do not have this liability, or they do not have this issue with respect to how to manage the professional things. ठीक है, compliance जो भी इनको करना है MSMEs को, वो बहुत आसानी से हो जाएगा with the help of these professionals. I hope it is clear. Next we have the infrastructure. Again, according to the government, what it terms the infrastructure as the growth multiplier. So we'll have to focus upon the hard infrastructure. We'll have to make sure that we have proper capital expenditure in different areas. Important baat ye hai, the government has given data that in the financial year 2014-15, the government had a public capital expenditure, public capex jo tha, that was almost around 2 lakh crores. 2 lakh crores. And this has been increased. For this year, the government estimates that for the financial year 2026-27, we are targeting an expenditure, public capital expenditure, to the tune of 12.2 lakh crores. So this is almost a 6 times increase in the overall capital expenditure. तो भाई simple सी बात है that if you will have adequate investments in the infrastructure, that is going to create the stimulus. That is going to create the stimulus in the overall market. और सिर्फ stimulus की जब बात की जा रही है, I am primarily talking in the context of the demand stimulus. ठीक है, तो बहुत बहुत ज़रूरी है that we have adequate investments in the hard infrastructure. We have different initiatives, National Infrastructure Pipeline, Gati, Shakti, and different things. So overall, all these areas would have sufficient funding with them, right? Next thing is the government is focusing upon the Infra Risk Guarantee Fund. अब इसका भाई objective क्या है? पहली बात तो problems क्या है जिसकी वजह से हम लोग ये fund लेके आ रहे हैं. पहली बात कि भाई जो भी construction चलता है, whatever construction goes, let's say the government is building a particular highway or a particular transport line, there is a lot of risk involved in that construction phase. There are time and cost overruns. इसलिए बहुत ज़्यादा रिस्क इन्वॉल्व होती है. इससे क्या होता है, जो प्राइवेट प्लेयर्स हैं, they are hesitant to invest in these domains. So what the government is thinking is that we would basically come up with this infrastructure risk guarantee fund, and this would provide the partial guarantee, क्रेडिट गारंटीज टू द लेंडर्स. अब इससे होगा क्या कि जो भी हमारे लेंडर्स हैं, इन द फॉर्म ऑफ द बैंक्स, इन द फॉर्म ऑफ द डेवलपर्स, ठीक है, या कोई भी हमारी थर्ड पार्टी है, दे वुड बी मोर इंक्लाइंड टू गिव द फंडिंग और टू गिव द लोन्स विद रिस्पेक्ट टू दीज प्रोजेक्ट्स. जो भी लॉन्ग जेस्टेशन प्रोजेक्ट्स हैं, these projects take almost 20 years, 30 years for the completion, right? So for all these projects, we would have a particular infrastructure risk guarantee fund, and this would provide the partial credit guarantees to the lenders. Then we have REITs, REIT based asset monetization. देखिए पहली बात तो ये कि REIT होता क्या है? It's basically the real estate investment trusts. These are like mutual funds. इसमें क्या होगा कि भाई जो investors हैं, they basically invest in a pool, right? They invest in a pool, and the manager with respect to this particular trust, this would now basically buy or own some commercial properties. मतलब malls ले लो आप, या फिर कोई भी commercial एक जगह, right? Commercial properties which can be used for any commercial purposes. Now this would then be leased. यहाँ पे हम इसको रेंट पे दे देंगे मॉल्स को, तो जो भी रिटर्न आएगा दैट वुड बी डिस्ट्रीब्यूटेड अमंग द इन्वेस्टर्स ऑल्सो. दैट इज व्हाट द वर्किंग ऑफ रियल एस्टेट इन्वेस्टमेंट ट्रस्ट. वी हैड द इन्वेस्टर्स हु इन्वेस्टेड इन अ पर्टिकुलर pool, and then this pool, on the basis of this pool, what we are doing is we are buying or owning the commercial properties, for example the malls. Then we basically let it out on rent, or we give it on lease, and whatever the money comes, it is then distributed among the investors. यहाँ पर हम focus कर रहे हैं that we do the asset monetization. We have a lot of properties with the central public sector enterprises. तो उन assets का asset monetization करना बहुत ज़रूरी है, ताकि जो those assets have been lying abandoned, they are not being used. So it's very important that we monetize those assets, right? So there would be dedicated REITs for offices, for commercial lands, और उससे होगा क्या कि भाई एक liquidity maintain रहेगी. It would lead to liquidity maintenance in the overall market. Again, this would lower the burden on the government because सारा जो खर्चा है वो गवर्नमेंट उठा रही है. It's being borne by the government. I'm not saying every of the expenses, but yes, majority of the expenses with respect to the infrastructure development is borne by the government. There are very few private players. तो जब ये हम एक create कर देंगे, जब asset monetization होगा, जो भी रियल एस्टेट एसेट्स हैं किसके, सेंट्रल पब्लिक सेक्टर एंटरप्राइजेस के, वील हैव मोर ऑफ द फंडिंग इन द मार्केट, राइट, एंड दैट वुड ऑल्सो यूटिलाइज द एग्जिस्टिंग एसेट्स वी हैव. ठीक है. Next thing is that once we'll have more of fund, this would give an stimulus to the private players because देखो जब investment होता है ना market में in different infrastructure areas, be it the hard infrastructure, for example the railways, pipelines and all that, private investments also comes along with that. If we'll have more of these monetization of these estates, these areas which come under the CPSEs, तो उससे क्या होगा, प्राइवेट सेक्टर वुड ऑल्सो हैव अ कॉन्फिडेंस कि हाँ भाई हम लोग भी इन्वेस्ट कर सकते हैं. तो दिस इज अगेन वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट. इट वुड लीड टू द इन्वेस्टमेंट्स, द प्राइवेट इन्वेस्टमेंट्स वुड क्राउड इन. सो दिस इज अगेन वेरी वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट. लेट्स गो टू द नेक्स्ट पार्ट विच इज ट्रांसपोर्ट एंड लॉजिस्टिक्स. देखिए ये बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है बिकॉज इंडिया, वी ऑलरेडी हैव द लॉजिस्टिक्स पॉलिसी विच द गवर्नमेंट केम अप विद, राइट, एंड वी आर फोकसिंग अपॉन मेकिंग श्योर कि भाई लॉजिस्टिक्स कॉस्ट जो है हमारी वो कम हो जाए. बिकॉज इन द डेवलप्ड कंट्रीज द एडवांटेज दे हैव विद रिस्पेक्ट टू द मैन्युफैक्चरिंग इज वहाँ पर लॉजिस्टिक्स कॉस्ट बहुत कम है. ट्रांसपोर्टेशन हो गया, पैकेजिंग हो गया, डिफरेंट स्टेजेस ऑफ द लॉजिस्टिक्स. Over there, the overall costs are quite less. But in India, the costs are too much. So therefore, we'll have to focus upon making sure that we have adequate logistics in place. What we are going to do is, we are going to come with a new corridor. We'll start a new dedicated freight corridor from Dankuni in the east to that of Surat in the west. Simple सा objective है कि भाई faster cargo movement हो और decongestion हो. We have a lot of congestion on the roads. We have a lot of congestion with respect to the rail. So why we need to basically have this condition. Let's make sure that we decongest the roads and the rails and provide a specific movement, a dedicated freight movement with respect to the east and the west part of the country, from Dankuni in the east to that of the Surat in the west. Then we have, the government is thinking to come with the 20 new national waterways. And very very important, and the priority would be on the national waterway 5 which is in Odisha. तो यहाँ पर सरकार बोल रही है कि जो हमारे कोल एरियाज हैं, फॉर एग्जाम्पल तालचर, अरंगुल, these are the areas which have the coal mines. They would be connected to the ports, for example the Paradeep and the Dhamra port via the inland waterways. तो यहाँ पर ये चीज़ इंपॉर्टेंट है समझने के लिए. नेक्स्ट, द गवर्नमेंट इज ऑल्सो मेकिंग श्योर दैट वी कम अप विद द कोस्टल कार्गो प्रमोशन स्कीम. सो द गवर्नमेंट इज थिंकिंग टू कम अप विद द कोस्टल कार्गो प्रमोशन स्कीम. इसका ऑब्जेक्टिव क्या होगा कि भाई जो भी शेयर है हमारा इनलैंड वाटरवेज का, वंस वी टॉक अबाउट द इनलैंड वाटरवेज और वंस वी टॉक अबाउट द कोस्टल शिपिंग, its share increases at a sustainable pace from 6% right now what we have to almost 12% in the overall transportation what we are talking about by 2047. तो ये ऑब्जेक्टिव है कोस्टल शिपिंग का एंड इनलैंड वाटरवेज का. ठीक है, यहाँ पर इंपॉर्टेंट क्यों बन जाता है, ताकि भाई आप ओवरऑल लॉजिस्टिक्स कॉस्ट कम कर सको. यू रिड्यूस द ओवरऑल लॉजिस्टिक्स कॉस्ट एंड ऑल्सो यू रिड्यूस द कार्बन फुटप्रिंट, बिकॉज अंडरस्टैंड दिस इज अ क्वाइट सस्टेनेबल वे ऑफ ट्रांसपोर्टिंग गुड्स एंड commodities. So therefore we'll have to focus upon this. We are also focusing upon the sea planes, and the government is coming up with the viability gap funding scheme. The viability gap funding scheme for the sea planes, again what it would do is it would boost the tourism aspect, and this would also provide the remote connectivity. For example, we have different islands, so this would make sure that we have proper connectivity with those islands. Also it would make sure that we have proper connectivity with different coastal regions, right? So again we are providing the viability gap funding with respect to the sea planes. ठीक है, ओवरऑल ऑब्जेक्टिव सिंपल सा यही है कि भाई लॉजिस्टिक्स कॉस्ट कम की जाए, कनेक्टिविटी बढ़ाई जाए, एंड वी ऑल्सो focus upon a greener transport, more sustainable transport mechanism. I hope it is clear. कमिंग टू द एनर्जी सिक्योरिटी एंड क्लाइमेट कमिटमेंट्स, सी यहाँ पर सरकार ने एक बहुत ही इंपॉर्टेंट मिशन की बात की है, विच इज़ द कार्बन capture utilization and storage CCUS mission, with an outlay of almost 20,000 crore for the next 5 years. There are different sectors which the government is targeting. We have these sectors as energy intensive sectors which are producing a lot of emissions, including the power, the steel, the cement, the refineries. We have the chemicals. ऑब्जेक्टिव क्या है कि भाई इन सेक्टर्स को हम डीकार्बोनाइज करें, पहला, ठीक है। डीकार्बोनाइज करने के साथ साथ जो हमारा क्लाइमेट ट्रांजिशन है, द क्लाइमेट ट्रांजिशन which we want to, which we aspire for, which we basically aspire for, that is met, because we already know that Prime Minister once talked about the Panchamrit goals. We have the nationally determined contributions where we focus upon reducing the energy intensity of the GDP. तो बहुत ज़रूरी है that we focus upon decarbonizing these industrial sectors, but we'll have to make sure that whatever initiatives we are going to have, they are growth compatible. Growth compatible का मतलब क्या है? See, we are not primarily responsible for the kind of ill effects we are witnessing in the climate change. So therefore, we often talk about the common but differentiated responsibilities, CBDR, and respective capabilities, the principle which we aspire for. So we would definitely focus upon decarbonizing different sectors, but again, that would be in line with the growth. We'll have to also focus upon the growth aspects. I hope it is clear. Next thing which the budget talks about, a very important thing, and this focuses upon the urban centers. इट कम्स विद द कंसेप्ट ऑफ द सिटी इकोनॉमिक रीजन्स, ठीक है। अब यहाँ पर क्या है कि भाई द बजट इज फोकसिंग अपॉन सिटीज एज इंजन्स ऑफ ग्रोथ, ठीक है। वाई सिटीज? बिकॉज देखो, सिटीज़ ही हैं जहाँ पर यू हैव द रियल इनोवेशन, यू हैव द रियल प्रोडक्टिविटी गेन्स, यू हैव द एग्लोमरेशन इकोनॉमीज, ठीक है। एग्लोमरेशन इकोनॉमीज का मतलब क्या है कि आपने भाई इंडस्ट्रियल क्लस्टर्स बना दिए अलग अलग, राइट। यू हैव द इंडस्ट्रियल क्लस्टर्स। नाउ in these industrial clusters you have different industries which are closely attached to each other, so this reduces the overall costs with respect to the transport, logistics, the people and other thing. So therefore agglomeration economies definitely give a boost to the overall production, to the overall competitiveness, and to the overall environment, the export and import environment also. So we have the budget is focusing upon coming up with the concept of the city economic regions. We would basically map certain cities in form of the economic linkages. कौन कौन से फैक्टर्स होंगे भाई? इकोनॉमिक लिंकेजेस हम लोग देखेंगे, सेक्टोरल स्ट्रेंथ्स देखेंगे कि कौन सा सेक्टर में दिस सिटी इज परफॉर्मिंग गुड, एंड रीजनल पोटेंशियल. So we have the economic linkages, the sectoral strengths, and the regional potential. On that basis, we'll come up with the city economic regions, and then the funding would be the 5,000 crore per the city economic region, and it would be based upon a challenge, ठीक है। challenge मतलब क्या कि भाई proposal अलग अलग cities submit करें, and then there would be a kind of the selection of certain cities, and on the basis of the performance which these cities do, then we would have, or the reforms which they basically undertake, there would be the financing. परफॉर्मेंस बेस्ड इंसेंटिव्स दिए जाएंगे, ठीक है। सिंपल सी बात है, यहाँ पर वी आर ट्राइंग टू गिव एम्फोसिस ऑन सिटी एज द ग्रोथ इंजन्स. नेक्स्ट थिंग विच द budget talks about is 7 proposed corridors, rail corridors. For example, Mumbai, Pune, then we have Hyderabad, Bengaluru, Pune, Hyderabad, Chennai, Bengaluru, Delhi, Banaras, Siliguri. ऑब्जेक्टिव बहुत सिंपल सा है कि भाई हम इकोनॉमिक इंटीग्रेशन पे ध्यान दें. We basically work upon the economic integration. We also focus upon the mobility, the labor, specifically the labor mobility aspect, right? Or regional convergence. यहाँ पर, because there are parts in the country, some parts are quite developed, the other parts are not that developed. So we'll have to basically do the linkage between these parts so that there is adequate transport of goods and people, and that would also lead to the sharing of ideas. So ये बहुत important है to create the rail corridors, right? To make sure that we have the labor mobility and there is regional integration, ठीक है? Next thing which you'll have to understand is the kind of financial sector reforms which the budget is talking about. The budget talks about coming up with a high level committee on the Banking for Viksit Bharat Committee. The name would be the Banking for Viksit Bharat Committee. Banking sector is witnessing quite of disruptions when we talk about the digital banking aspect, when we talk about the digitization aspect in the banking, and therefore it needs a high powered committee to look into the issues with respect to the overall banking and to come up with the solutions. Mandate क्या रहेगा कि भाई long term banking reforms, ठीक है, आप बताइए, और कैसे we can ensure more of financial stability in the system, ठीक है, कैसे we can focus more upon the inclusion aspect, the financial inclusion. For example, we came up with the Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana, how different schemes can give life to this idea of financial inclusion. Consumer protection, we have been witnessing a lot of scams once we talk about the banking. So how can we protect the consumer? So the mandate of the committee would be on these lines. Then the budget also talks about the NBFC reforms, non-banking financial companies, which those entities which are registered as companies under the Companies Act of 2013 or 1956, ठीक है. यहाँ पर क्या है, उनका काम जो होता है NBFCs का, the work which they perform, they are on the similar lines of banking. For example, we have giving loans or different things. Specifically, the budget talks about the restructuring of two important institutions, two important NBFCs. One is the Power Finance Corporation and the other is the Rural Electrification Corporation, REC and PFC. इनका proper restructuring होना चाहिए so as to make sure that they can be more effective, right, in their overall objective. The very aim is to make sure that the efficiency of these organizations is increased and they have cleaner balance sheets. They are accruing a lot of losses. That should not happen. Okay. Next is foreign investments and capital markets. यहाँ पर the government is proposing the review of the Foreign Exchange Management Act, non-debt instruments rules. तो भाई नॉन डेट इंस्ट्रूमेंट्स रूल मतलब क्या, जो भी हमारे यहाँ इन्वेस्टमेंट्स हो रहे हैं एंड द इन्वेस्टमेंट्स इन द इक्विटी which is leading to the ownership in the assets, तो जो ओनरशिप क्रिएट कर रहा है, ठीक है, दैट इज डन थ्रू द फॉरेन एक्सचेंज मैनेजमेंट एक्ट. इट इज इन लाइन विद दीज रूल्स. वहां पर विल हैव टू बेसिकली मेक श्योर दैट वी वर्क एंड मेक इट मोर कंड्यूसिव फॉर द इन्वेस्टमेंट्स. नेक्स्ट थिंग इज द corporate bond market reforms. We'll have to make sure that we give adequate emphasis to the corporate bond markets. ठीक है, यहाँ पर सरकार बात कर रही है that we'll provide 100 crores of the incentive for the issuance of 1,000+ crores issuance. तो यहाँ पर एक तरह की सिंपल सी बात है that the government wants to have more sources of funding and therefore we are talking about the corporate bonds. We are also talking about the municipal bonds, right? So corporate bonds हो गया, municipal bonds हो गया, review of FEMA non-debt instrument rules हो गया, just to make sure that we have more conducive condition for the foreign investments and capital markets. I hope it is clear. Let's now go to the next thing, which is the services sector. Why this is important is for the reason कि भाई services sector is one of the most important sectors. It contributes more than 50% to the overall GDP. ठीक है, तो ये बहुत important है. This is very important and we'll have to, in order to provide productive livelihood opportunities to the youths of the country, we'll have to focus upon the services sector because this is going to be the new growth engine. Now what the government talks about is coming up with the high-powered standing committee on education to employment and enterprise, which can look into this particular area कि भाई how we can reduce the mismatch between the industry relevant skills जो industries को चाहिए and basically what skills people have. That is one of the major mandates of this particular standing committee. Next thing which I'll have to understand is that we have the services as a major source of the urban employment and global competitiveness and exports. Therefore, the government is making sure that every domain in the services sector is given due importance because ये एक normal sector नहीं है, it's a strategic sector for India. ठीक है, so it is coming to focus on different areas. For example, let's talk about the tourism. It's focusing upon the tourism, right? And it's making sure that we develop large scale tourism clusters जहाँ पे हमारा focus होगा infrastructure पे, accessibility पे, last mile connectivity और local employment, right? Next thing is that India would host the very first global big cat summit. We have big cats in the form of leopards, lion, right? So these are we are going to host the very first global big cat summit, the very first. And we'll also focus upon the aspects of the NDDK, which basically talks about the digitization aspect, right? So we'll create a grid, we'll make sure that we have the digitization of the digital content, right? And then that would really help in making sure that different institutes around the country, they are well connected to each other, right? A destination digital grid, knowledge grid. So we are focusing upon different destinations. So सारे destinations का हम एक grid बनाएंगे, and then we'll have the digitization of all those places, so that can be viewed by any of the people, right? Next, the government is focusing upon the medical tourism aspect. Very, very important, because this is an area where we have seen a lot of people coming to India and accessing the health services. We have especially a lot of hospitals in Chennai, we have in Gurgaon, we have in Delhi. So government is focusing upon the expansion of heal in India, right? And we will be focusing upon the allied health professionals. Allied health professionals का मतलब क्या होता है? See, we already have the existing doctors, we have the dentists, we have the nurses, but apart from that, we have, for example, the dietitians, we have the physiotherapists. So to make sure that we provide them, we come up with more number of courses in these areas, allied health professionals, and train 1.5 lakh caregivers, which are very important once we talk about the elderly population or once we talk about the babies, right? So we have to focus upon these caregivers and give them the industry or the required training, which is really required, so that they can have a professional experience. The all the hierarchies, all the positions in the care economy, they are well written, and a proper framework is achieved with respect to the caregivers. Then we have the orange economy, very, very important. For example, we have the animation, we have the visual effects, we have the gaming, we have the comics. So यहाँ पर सरकार बोल रही है, the government is saying that we are going to create these content creator labs, AVGC content creator labs in different schools and institutions around the country, so as to give a boost to the animation, the visual effects, the gaming, and the comic content. Then the government is saying that we are going to give a boost to the capability centers. पहली बात, global capability centers होता क्या है? Let's say we have Amazon, right? Amazon as a company. Now Amazon can basically it can ask any of the entities in India who are involved in the market research कि भाई आप हमको बताओ कि कौन कौन से प्रोडक्ट्स और कौन कौन से एरियाज में हमको काम करना चाहिए. So over here, Amazon is basically taking the help of a third party, a different company. If Amazon itself comes with a particular capability center where it is the wholly maintained subsidiary of Amazon, where Amazon has a complete control over that, and it provides all those research, all those inputs with respect to how we can make things more conducive, how we can generate more profits. Those are the capability centers. Most of the companies around the world, because of the talent we have, they're dependent on India. But now what they want is they're establishing their own centers in the country. ठीक है, तो यहाँ पर इनका काम क्या होता है? रिसर्च एंड डेवलपमेंट थोड़ा देखना, या फिर डेटा एनालिटिक्स करना, या डिज़ाइन करना, जो भी फंक्शंस, लीगल फंक्शंस प्रोवाइड कराना. ठीक है, so we'll be focusing upon these global capability centers, and we would make sure that we focus more upon the tier 2 and tier 3 cities. And again, the government would provide the plug and play facilities, where existing facilities are already provided, where the facilities are provided at the prior of a particular industry starts its work. So before that, all things are provided, be it the electricity, be it the overall the power lines and everything, right? Then we are also focusing upon making sure that there is adequate center state cooperation in this particular area, because ultimately it is the states which are responsible for the final execution, final implementation. Why this would be important? Because there are a lot of gaps in these things, and we are focusing more upon the high skill employment. There would be the knowledge spillovers, there would be the positive effects once we have these global capability centers, and this would lead to a lot of new services, a lot of more economic services. For example, we can have legal services being provided, because we are focusing upon making India as an arbitration hub. We are focusing upon the international legal services center, right? So ease of doing business पे भी focus करेगा. Focus upon the ease of doing business. You must be aware of the International Global Financial Center, right? We have the GIFT Center, we have the IFSC GIFT Center in Gujarat, right? So we have these centers around the country, and we are going to give boost to them by providing the necessary environment which is necessary for their overall development, by providing the environment which is necessary for their overall development, so that there can be the knowledge spillovers, so that there can be positive spillovers. I hope it is clear. Next is education to employment. Again, we'll have to address the mismatch we have with respect to the education aspect and the industry required skills, because industry का requirement अलग है, जो youths के पास skill है, जो education है वो अलग है. So we'll have to focus upon the skill mismatch, and because of that what is happening is there is a lot of low employability issues, right? Even people who have the requisite degrees, or even those PhD scholars, they are working for a very small amount of money. So we'll have to basically focus upon that, and budget is directly targeting on this particular skill mismatch problems. Next, we are focusing upon the Bharatiya Bhasha Pustak Yojana, where they would be focused upon the making sure that जो भी higher education की हमारी books हैं, what all higher education books we have, we basically translate them into Indian languages, so as to make sure that there is more of accessibility, so as to make sure that people are comfortable in their own vernacular language with respect to the engineering, with respect to medicine, with respect to law, management. तो यहाँ से होगा क्या, that we would be able to focus more upon the inclusion होगा, जो language barriers हैं society में वो कम होंगे, right? And there would be improved comprehension, people would understand more, right? Then we would focus upon the new sectors, the new and emerging sectors, for example, in the form of the artificial intelligence, semiconductors, climate technology. First of all, we have people who have, who have skills. Once we talk about the higher needs of these sectors, we have engineers. But once we talk about the assembly line, technicians or some other people who are required in the overall manufacturing with respect to the AI hardware, with respect to the semiconductors, we don't have the requisite number, because they also need to have certain skill set. तो engineers or highly qualified engineers तो हैं हमारे पास, but we don't have those mid-level, or let's say the lower mid-level people. So therefore we need to focus upon the skill, provide those skills to the people, and we will also focus upon making sure that we focus upon different areas, cyber security, climate technologies, robotics, automation. ठीक है, तो यहाँ पर सिंपल सी बात है, ऐसे हमको credentials उनको देने हैं, ऐसे हम लोगों को skills देने हैं, that they become eligible to work productively in these sectors. We'll also focus upon the National Centers for Excellence on a public-private partnership mode, on a PPP mode, where we would focus upon the advanced manufacturing, या फिर आप मान लो digital services, right? Or let's say we'll focus upon the healthcare technology. You must have heard about the robotic surgery, right? तो यहाँ पर हमको centers of excellence बनाने, and the curriculum in these centers for excellence would be aligned to the market needs, जो हमारी market needs हैं, because that is one of the biggest concerns we have. Still, the curriculum which we have in engineering colleges or the medical colleges, that is obsolete. That is, most of the things, they do not incorporate the recent development and technology which we are witnessing. So we need to have the industry linked curriculum. That's what you'll have to understand. Next thing is the health, wellness and sports. Again, the government is focusing upon the preventive healthcare primarily because of the burden of the non-communicable disease. More than 2/3 of the overall deaths in the country are attributed to the non-communicable disease. So we'll have to shift from curative healthcare to that of the preventive model. ठीक है, तो ये बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट चीज़ है. Next thing which the government is looking for is expansion of the mental health aspect, to make sure that we focus on these mental health caregivers. Reason, there are instances of drug abuse in the country, there are instances of depression, suicides, and therefore we'll have to, because of the increased work pressure and so many things, we'll have to focus upon these areas. There has to be the expansion of the tele-mental health program. You must have heard about the e-Sanjeevani, or let's say we have the mental health program, tele-mental health program, which is carried out by the NIMHANS. Right, so this is again very important. Ayush mainstreaming, the government is focusing upon coming up with more and more National Institute for Ayurveda to make sure that they have important role in the overall healthcare, plus the medical tourism, and we'll be developing those interventions on the basis of Ayurveda, so that more and more people from outside, the country can come and visit and take those services. We'll focus upon the standardization. This is again very important. Standardization of different Ayurveda, and also the standardization of different procedures with respect to the health, right? Research support and all that. And again, sports, we have already focused that why we are focusing upon sports as an economic sector, because see, this is not only going to provide the employment, but this is also engage the youths. This would give a national brand. This would come with good health outcomes, right? So we'll focus upon the sports infrastructure development, ट्रेनिंग सेंटर्स बनाएंगे, स्पोर्ट्स साइंस को हम लोग प्रमोट करेंगे विद डिफरेंट करिकुलम्स, विल प्रमोट द स्पोर्ट्स साइंस, and we'll make sure that this is at the grassroots level, because in many of the villages we have a lot of sporting talent. So we'll make sure that we come up with these infrastructure so that more and more people also join this particular revolution. And ultimately the focus would be on sports good manufacturing. We already discussed that, and we'll make sure sports goods jo hai hamare, it is done by the different MSMEs, so that they also get a boost, manufacturing clusters and other thing, right? Next thing is digital public infrastructure. Why we have to focus upon this? Reason being that we already have the India stack, and now we are talking about Aadhaar enabled payment system. We are focusing upon the Jan Dhan Aadhaar mobile. We are focusing upon the Aadhaar biometrics. We need to make sure that from India stack we basically go to this thing of global public goods. ग्लोबल पब्लिक गुड्स, ठीक है? तो यहाँ पर हमारा एक्सपेंशन होगा हमारा डिजी लॉकर का. डिजी लॉकर इज अगेन अ वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट component of the overall digital public infrastructure domain, where the credentials of different documents it is obtained through the DigiLocker. Then we have the ONDC, where ONDC it has democratized the digital commerce, ठीक है? तो पहले क्या था कि भाई प्लेटफॉर्म्स को, डिफरेंट प्लेटफॉर्म्स को मोनोपोलीज थी. अब ONDC के बेसिस पे क्या होगा? It would democratize the digital commerce and it would lead to a more open interoperable network, right? Then we have the account aggregators. Now what are account aggregators? These are basically the NBFCs, which are regulated by the Reserve Bank of India. They basically ensure the secure डिजिटल एंड ऑथोराइज्ड शेयरिंग ऑफ फाइनेंशियल डेटा. तो अलग अलग हमारे जो इंस्टीट्यूशंस हैं उनके बीच में जो फाइनेंशियल डेटा का गिव एंड टेक होता है, सो दिस इज डन बाय द अकाउंट एग्रीगेटर विद प्रॉपर कंसेंट. सो वी आर गोइंग टू फोकस अपॉन द एक्सपेंशन ऑफ डिजिलॉकर, ONDC एंड अकाउंट एग्रीगेटर्स. अगेन द वेरी फोकस वुड बी ऑफ द DPI वुड बी ऑन द MSMEs एंड सर्विसेज, ताकि भाई जो भी MSMEs कंप्लाइंस इशूज़ फेस कर रहे हैं, दे हैव paperless onboarding, lower compliance costs हो जाए, and this also leads to faster delivery of services, right? Again, very important, paperless, faceless governance, and we are also focusing upon the future ready professionals. ठीक है? मतलब क्या? देखो भाई, अभी there are needs, there are emerging needs. For example, in let's say we have the climate change which is taking place. अब climate change के लिए we are coming up with a lot of interventions. So we would need those people who can audit कि भाई क्या आप climate रेजिलियंट प्रैक्टिसेस को अडॉप्ट कर रहे हो, ठीक है? या फिर आर्टिफिशियल इंटेलिजेंस की बात की जाए तो वहाँ पे एथिक्स के इश्यूज़ हैं, तो वी कैन हैव AI एथिसिस्ट्स ओवर देयर, या सेमीकंडक्टर इंजीनियर्स हो गए, डिजिटल फॉरेंसिक एक्सपर्ट्स हो गया, स्पोर्ट्स डेटा एनालिसिस्ट हो गए. तो इन सब चीज़ों के लिए वील हैव टू कम अप विद डिफरेंट करिकुलम प्रोग्राम्स for different professionals, right? And we'll basically make sure that we come with a proper structured framework for these future ready professionals. तो यहाँ पर objective क्या है कि हम इंडिया को prepare करें, India's workforce को, we prepare the India's workforce for those jobs which do not basically yet fully exist. That is what the very objective is. Then we have the agriculture and rural economy. Again, a very important component, I believe, because the very base of India is agriculture. We have more than 40% people still in the agriculture sector. So therefore, it becomes very, very important. More than 45% population livelihood is dependent on agriculture. Then we have the food security issues. We have the inflation management. Rural demand जो है वो बहुत डिपेंड करती है एग्रीकल्चर पे और रूरल इकोनॉमी पे, ठीक है? तो यहाँ पर द गवर्नमेंट इज फोकसिंग अपॉन मेकिंग श्योर दैट वी हैव एडिक्वेट फोकस ऑन द डिजिटल एस्पेक्ट ऑफ द एग्रीकल्चर, राइट? डिजिटाइजेशन. तो यहाँ पे जो भी एग्री स्टैक है आपका, एग्री स्टैक को एक्सपैंड करो, डिजिटाइजेशन को बेसिकली गिव अ बूस्ट टू द डिजिटाइजेशन एस्पेक्ट. बट किस चीज़ का? विल फोकस अपॉन द लैंड रिकॉर्ड्स, द लैंड रिकॉर्ड्स, डिजिटाइज द लैंड रिकॉर्ड्स और द क्रॉप डेटा, या फिर भाई फार्मर्स की हमारी आइडेंटिटी हो गई, ठीक है, इनकी आइडेंटिटी, टू इशू द आइडेंटिटी कार्ड्स टू दीज फार्मर्स सो दैट दे कैन बी गिवन द टारगेटेड बेनिफिट्स, राइट। प्रिसिशन फार्मिंग के लिए क्रेडिट और इंश्योरेंस प्रॉपर मिल जाएगा, तो इसलिए वी हैव टू डिजिटाइज। वी हैव ऑल्सो, द बजट ऑल्सो टॉक्स अबाउट भारत विस्तार, विच बेसिकली टॉक्स अबाउट मेकिंग श्योर दैट ICAR का जो भी डेटा है, it is integrated with the artificial intelligence, right, and that data can be used for the public welfare. That is what Bharat Vistar talks about, can be important for the prelims. And then the budget also talks about the climate resilient agriculture, where we focus upon the climate smart crops, or we focus upon the drought resistant varieties, drought resistance, because we are witnessing the ill effects of climate change, so we need all of these crops, right. How we'll do that? By strengthening the Krishi Vigyan Kendras, KVKs, right, KVKs, and then ICR, the different institutions of ICRs will basically strengthen them, right. Then we are focusing upon the farmer producer organizations and market linkages. यहाँ पर ऑब्जेक्टिव क्या है कि भाई आप FPOs को स्ट्रेंथन करो ताकि इनकी बार्गेनिंग पावर बढ़े, दे इंक्रीज देयर बार्गेनिंग पावर, राइट, एंड by then what would happen is to strengthen these FPOs so that they have adequate credit with them and they are able to focus on making the agriculture sector more productive, so that they can focus upon the value addition, right, they can focus upon the export orientation. Then the budget also talks about the food processing and storage aspects, where it says that we'll have to expand the cold chain infrastructure, we'll have to focus upon the post harvest losses, because we are witnessing a lot of post harvest. According to Niti Aayog, almost 1 lakh crore every year is wasted because of the post harvest infrastructure, right, because we do not have post harvest losses, because we do not have the adequate infrastructure with respect to that. Cold storage centers nahi hai hamare paas, adequate mechanized instruments nahi hai, so as to make sure that we focus upon the reduction of the waste. Next, it also talks about the high value agriculture. For example, it talks about cocoa, for example it talks about cashew, for example it talks about the coconut. So we have to focus upon the high value agriculture so that those things can also be exported and we have better earnings for the farmers, right. So this is with respect to the agriculture and rural economy. Next, we have the social justice and inclusion. The budget talks about primarily the women-led development, where the focus is on the self-help groups. We already know that because of the self-help groups, we have Kudumbushri in Kerala, we have different, the revolution was taken by Ella Bhatt in the domain of this self-help groups. So what you'll have to understand is that these self-help groups definitely help in getting the productive livelihood opportunities, especially to the women, right. So we'll have to focus upon this. We'll have to make sure that there is proper skill development with respect to the women and the entrepreneurship support. For example, you must be aware of the scheme, Stand Up India scheme, right? Startup India, Stand Up India, where we focus on providing the adequate loans to these women and entrepreneurs or the SCs or the STs. So the overall objective is to make sure that women specifically have adequate credit access, right? Next, the budget talks about the Divyangjan empowerment, where it says that these assistive technologies which are useful for these Divyangjans, which make their life easier, that should be focused upon. Artificial limbs, manufacturing corporation, this should be enhanced. The funding with respect to this particular corporation must be enhanced so that we focus more upon the assistive technologies, and with that we'll be able to export these technologies also, right. Inclusive infrastructure pe hum focus karenge, which is inclusive in a sense which all people can access. Skill training aligned with the employability part, and also the budget talks about the elderly geriatric care, right. It focuses upon the caregivers. We already talked about the caregivers economy, right, formalizing the caregiver economy and the informal workers. The government has already come up with the code on wages, the code on industrial relations, the 4 labor codes. Plus, it's saying that we will come up with the schemes which give protection to the informal workers. For example, we have the gig workers, right? We'll make sure that there is a convergence. There is a convergence between the digital public infrastructure and the welfare schemes which are provided by the government, right? There can be, for example, the issuance of the identity cards, and so as to minimize the leakages in these funding things, leakages in these schemes, we can have the linkage of digital public infrastructure with that of these welfare schemes. I hope it is clear. Next is the Purvodaya and the balanced regional development. Very, very important component. Why we have focused on this because we have certain parts in the countries which are not adequately developed, right, which are not adequately developed. We have the states like Bihar, we have Jharkhand, we have Odisha, we have West Bengal, we have Assam, and the northeastern states. So the focus would be on eastern India, right? Thrust is on eastern India and the northeast. There would be focus upon the infrastructure and logistics hub, and also the National Institute of Design would be set up in the northeast. Infrastructure, if I'm talking about the infrastructure, I'm talking about the ports, I'm talking about the inland waterways, I'm talking about the, for example, the logistics hubs, the industrial corridors. यहाँ पर सिंपल सा ऑब्जेक्टिव है कि भाई जो भी पोटेंशियल है, जो भी इकोनॉमिक पोटेंशियल है नॉर्थ ईस्ट स्टेट्स का या फिर ईस्टर्न स्टेट्स का, उसको अनलॉक करें, टू अनलॉक द इकोनॉमिक पोटेंशियल ऑफ दीज एरियाज एंड रिड्यूस द रीजनल इम्बैलेंस which we have, right? So that why people are coming to Delhi and to these places for the employment reason, because those places where they originally live, they don't provide adequate livelihood opportunities. So we need to focus upon a balanced regional development, simple as that. And we would also focus upon the northeast connectivity, tourism. We have the budget talks about the bamboo industry, right? It also talks about the bioeconomy economy in the northeast. We have the different high value crops, for example oranges or pineapple, not oranges, the pineapple in Meghalaya. So the government is focusing upon making sure that there is adequate investment in these areas. Then it also says that tourism would be given a boost in these areas, and there would be the linkage with respect to Act East. Act East is primarily for the countries on the eastern side of India, right? But we'll make sure that the northeastern states, they are also well integrated in this particular integration, right? Because they serve as the corridor to the eastern countries. We have Myanmar, we have Thailand, we have Laos, we have Cambodia, we have Indonesia, so many countries, these Southeast Asian countries. So the northeastern states would act as a corridor, and therefore we'll have to focus adequately on Act East linkage. Next, we have the fiscal strategy. Over here, the target of the government is simple, that for the financial year 2025-26, the fiscal deficit was, according to the government, 4.8% of GDP. It's trying to reduce it, and the target for this year is 4.4%. Again, the very objective is having a medium-term consolidation path without compromising the growth. Will not compromise on the growth. Strategy would be to make sure that there is the growth is based upon the capital expenditure led growth in different infrastructures, and also the asset monetization. Those abundant assets of the CPSEs, central public sector enterprises, or of the government or the companies, they must be monetized so that can be used productively and we have more liquidity in the market. And again, the government would also focus upon increasing its disinvestment proceeds by liquidating some of its stakes in different corporations. Next, once we talk about the borrowing and debt, what the government is saying is that we will focus upon the long-term sustainability and lower interest burden. We'll make sure that we do not go for much borrowings, because that would crowd out the private sector. So we would focus upon make sure that we have different sources of funding and an environment where there is more of the investment by the private sector. There is crowding in of the private sector, simple as that. Next, taxation. With respect to this year, there have been no major rate changes as such. Again, the focus by the government is on the simplification, on certainty, on stability, and again, it is focusing upon the dispute resolution. This is important. The government has focused upon the dispute resolution. Once we talk about the aspects of the customs rationalization, again, the very objective is to increase the manufacturing and to make sure that different customs rate which we apply, they are rationalized. ठीक है, custom duty rationalization. इससे होगा क्या, that there would be a support for the manufacturing aspect, the clean energy and strategic sectors, simple as that. तो यहाँ पर ज़्यादा कोई headline grabbing changes नहीं किए हैं सरकार ने. Rather, the government is focusing upon the trust and predictability aspect. Simple, trust based tax regime. This is what you'll have to understand. Next aspect is that of the cooperative federalism and the governance aspect. देखिए, सेंटर स्टेट पार्टनरशिप बहुत ज़रूरी है, because real implementers at the ground level are the states, and the government knows that. So it is focusing upon the center state partnership in various domains, be it the infrastructure, be it the skilling aspect और दी अर्बन डेवलपमेंट जो हमने बात की थी, सिटी इकोनॉमिक जोन्स, राइट, सिटी इकोनॉमिक रीजन्स. नेक्स्ट आउटकम बेस्ड फंडिंग होगी. जो भी आप इंप्रूवमेंट शो करोगे, वट एवर परफॉर्मेंस enhancement you would show to us, then on that basis we'll have the funding with respect to that. So it's almost like reform linked incentives, and this would also give a boost to the ease of doing business, because what we have been witnessing is many of the companies, definitely our ranking or our status with respect to ease of doing business has improved a lot, but still in many states, first of all, it is not there in all the states, but still in many states what we are finding is that there are a lot of hurdles, and this is hampering the investments, especially the foreign investments, right? And we'll focus upon cooperative investments, not just cooperative federalism, but also competitive federalism, where different states compete among each other, right? And there is proper the relations between the center and the states, and among the states, they are fruitful. So for that, the government would definitely, I believe, would give emphasis on the Team India concept, Team India with respect to the Niti Aayog, and it would make sure that things are smooth, because the states like Kerala or Tamil Nadu are at loggerheads with center. So definitely there is a need for a greater, smooth, cohesive collaboration between the center and the state. Last, what this budget basically talks about, see again, what the budget feels is that, if you give a reading of the budget, that it's definitely growth oriented, and there's not much of populism which is there, because what we have seen, as I started the discussion, it is more of a continuation, and it is reform driven. It's saying that we have done a lot of things in the last 10 years, in the last 12 years, so we'll have to continue that, right? And it is future facing, where we are not basically going for just one reform in just one sector. Rather, we have talked about the infrastructure, both the hard infrastructure and the human capital, where the education has also been focused, the health has also been focused, manufacturing has been focused. In addition, the services sector has also been given a fillip, and all these things combined would definitely lead to a more of Viksit Bharat, a realization of the dream of developed India by 2047. ठीक है, तो इलेक्शन सेंट्रिक नहीं है एज सच कोई बजट, या फिर कोई फिस्कली कोई रेकलेस पोजीशन भी नहीं शो करी है गवर्नमेंट ने. इट इज़ सस्टेनेबल, एंड दिस इज डेफिनेटली अ ग्रोथ ओरिएंटेड बजट व्हाट वी कैन टॉक अबाउट. There are few things which I have taken from the budget. As I said, that there are certain concepts. For example, the fiscal deficit. अब fiscal deficit होता क्या है? देखिए, fiscal deficit जो टोटल हमारा बजट एक्सपेंडिचर है, माइनस टोटल जो हमारे बजट रिसिप्ट्स हैं, एक्सक्लूडिंग द बोरोइंग, उसको हम बोलते हैं फिस्कल डेफिसिट. तो आइडियली फिस्कल डेफिसिट इज नथिंग बट इट्स बेसिकली द बोरोइंग विच द गवर्नमेंट इज डूइंग. इफ योर expenditures are more and if your total receipts are less, obviously you will have more of fiscal deficit. But if you see, there has been a continuation in the lower trajectory as far as the fiscal deficit is concerned. From 6.5% in the financial year 22-23, it has reduced to almost 4.3. That is what you'll have to understand. That is what the target for 2026-27 is all about. Revenue deficit क्या होता है भाई? Total revenue expenditure minus the total revenue receipts. That is what the revenue deficit is all about. Then we have the effective revenue deficit. Effective revenue deficit में क्या किया आपने? जो भी आपका revenue deficit था, उसमें से आपने grants को हटा दिया. कौन से grants को? Which are used for the capital asset creation. You get the effective revenue deficit. Primary deficit is that out of the fiscal deficit, you reduce the interest payments. You basically deduct the interest payments. That is how you get the primary deficit. If you'll see, there is a lower trajectory for almost all of these things, all of these inputs. Next thing which you'll have to understand, this can be important from the prelims aspect. Where does the rupee comes from? So we have the very first which you'll have to understand is the borrowings and liabilities, almost 24%, then corporation tax 18%, income tax 21%, customs 4%, union excise duty 6%, GST and other taxes 15%, non-tax revenues 10%, non-debt capital receipts 2%. Rupee goes to, we have almost 22% as the state's share of the taxes, finance commission and other transfers, for example 7%. We have the grants which are given on the basis of the finance commission, so this is what you'll have to understand. Centrally sponsored scheme 8%, interest payments 20%, Defense 11%. So defense is having a very important expenditure side of it. Major subsidies, central sector scheme 17%, civil pension 2%, other expenditure 7%. So just remember the biggest biggest of these two things, where the inputs come and where the output goes. Just the top three would be more than enough. Next thing is the capital receipts. So we have the revenue receipts, which comprise of the taxes, for example, and then we have the capital receipts. Capital receipts can basically be in the form of the borrowings. It can be in the form of the you can say the dividends, right? So that is what you'll have to understand. Once we talk about the capital receipts, you can see it is on an upward trajectory part. Revenue receipts, they are more or less stationary. They saw a dip in 25-26, and now the government is definitely expecting that this would rise, right? Next thing is we have the expenditure, effective capital expenditure. We have effective capital expenditure again on more or less on a straight trajectory. And then we have the revenue expenditure, which is again increasing. If you have increasing revenue expenditure, what it means is the government expenditure with respect to the routine task, it is also increasing. Then we have the trend in the net receipts of the center. So look at this: center's net tax revenue, non-tax revenues, and non-debt capital receipts. Non-debt capital receipts means what? That which is not creating a debt. You are not going for the borrowings, right? So this is again increasing. It's almost 1.2 lakh crores with respect to 26-27, and center's net tax revenue, this is also increasing. So if there's a statement in the prelims which says that overall center's net tax revenue has been witnessing an upward trajectory, that is correct. That is how you look at the trends. They are not going to ask the absolute numbers, right? Total transfer to the states. So again, it is expected that for financial year 2026-27, transfer would be to the tune of 26.2 lakh crores to the states. Next thing is the expenditure on the major items. This is important. A question in the prelims can be asked. It is first for the transport, then it is for the defense, for the rural development, home affairs, agriculture and allied. So ये पांच top 5 आप याद रखिए, important है. Again I'm saying it's for transport, top in crores, almost 6 lakh crores. Then you have the defense, almost again 5,94,000 crores. Rural development, 2,73,000 crores. Home affairs, 2,55,000 crores. Agriculture and allied sectors, 1,62,000 crores. So this, just remember that. It can be really important. Here we come at the end of the discussion. I hope this was a fruitful discussion. We have tried to cover almost each and every part. Also from the mains, this is the Telegram channel. You can just search the IAS track, and definitely you can join this particular channel. We have a lot of things which would be discussed on the channel itself. This is the QR code. You can just use it and join the Telegram channel. And yes, do subscribe the YouTube channel if you really like the video. That would definitely give me a boost to come with more quality content. And yes, as I said, do join the channel, because once you join the channel, you'll be having access to a lot of informations. I generally don't talk about all that. There are a lot of content which is there online, which is not really useful, which is not in line with the demand of the aspirants. But we would focus on the IS Track channel to provide the quality and the credible strategies, right, which can really help you ace the examination. That's it from my side. Thank you so much. All the very best.